A few years ago, when I coached my 7-year-old sons and their basketball team, I tried to teach the group a couple basic plays, where to line up, and we went over it. We made sure they remembered it. We ran it live in practice, and they did all right. We wanted to look organized when they took the court. But then the game came. The whistle blew, the ball got tossed up, and chaos ensued. Some of the kids were so excited in the moment, they lost all direction. And ever since that experience, I've been trying to get better at figuring out what kids can process at what age and how I can be a better coach. So when I saw a book entitled To Be a Better Coach, a guide for the youth sport coach and coach developer, I thought I better read it, and I did. And I'm happy to say that the authors are here with me today, Drs. Lori Gano Overway and Pete Van Mullem. Welcome to the Youth Sports Experience.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Mark. Really excited to share with you what we put together in this book. So glad to hear you read it.
Yeah, so clearly when I read it, you guys put a ton of time into this, did a lot of research. You hit all different sports, got input from people. You both have backgrounds working on various levels, with coaches, coaching yourself, your professors at outstanding universities. So what inspired this book?
I'll go ahead and start, I guess. Lori and I had worked together on, as part of a task force for the National Standards for Sport Coaches, which Lori chaired. And during that process, I think we had some conversations, sort of informally, about it'd be really nice to put this into more of a book form that the coaches could digest and understand some of these concepts that we were working on with the standards. And so Lori and I had met and talked about that, and then sort of an opportunity kind of presented itself through the United States Sports Coaching Association there that Lori's really involved with for a book series. And so it sort of evolved a little bit, and maybe Lori has a little different take on that, but that's kind of how I see it. It sort of evolved from this other project into something that we thought we could put into this format. So.
Yeah, I think you're right on with that, Pete, is that what we really wanted to do was be able to blend knowledge and practice. And so an opportunity, as we looked at other books, what we saw was that there's lots of good content, but you often didn't see how it was put into action. And so one of the things that we were really trying to emphasize with this book is lots of examples of coaches, how coaches would use this information and how coaches could reflect on this information. And as Pete mentioned, I'm involved with the United States Center for Coaching Excellence, and so they were kind of focused in on this notion of coach development as well. And so we targeted not only towards coaches, but also towards coach developers. So how could a program administrator at a youth sport academy or an athletic director at a high school help their coaches by sharing these practical examples or by using the reflective questions to kind of guide coaches through the content of improving their own coaching?
What I thought sets the book apart is it's dedicated or directed at youth sports coaches. I mean, there's a lot of books out there, by professional coaches, high-level college coaches, which is more about coaching adults, higher stakes stuff. What sets coaching youth sports apart from that adult world?
Yeah, for me, I think it's about recognizing that what you're trying to do is build in for kids a lifelong desire to be involved in physical activity and sport. And so that you're trying to ignite them to be excited about participating in the sport and to engage in it for a lifetime because they recognize all the great benefits in terms of physical development and life skill development. And it's just a fun experience. And so I think that the emphasis for the youth sport coach is really about kind of lighting the fire and providing fundamental knowledge that will help an individual continue to be involved in the sport.
Yeah, and I would just echo what Lori said, although I would add that I think the need for what you're hinting at, Mark, is the need for some of these resources. There's a lot of resources out there for coaches, and I think there's still a lot of resources out there for youth coaches as well in different areas. And I mean, not necessarily the book, like you find a book just on it, but I think it's accessing those resources, knowing where to find them. And I think one of the things that, you have a lot of youth people involved in youth sport, or getting involved in youth sport, like yourself. You mentioned, before we started with, coaching your kids, just where do I go? Where do I find that information? And I think that's kind of what we hoped this book would help as well. It's just, it provides really an overview. There's a lot of information in there, but it speaks to that youth coach. It also really speaks to the high school coach, we think, too. It goes in a little more detail there. And there are concepts that do translate to the other. I think, there are a few concepts that translate to other areas of sport or other even college level coaches. It's just not written for them, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how old you each are. I'm 51, so I've seen a lot of change on the youth sports landscape, especially since I've become a parent. It's very different than when I was a kid. When I was a kid, there was very little structure by comparison, much less adult involvement. And today, it's almost like the professionalization of youth sport to some extent. And I'm telling you, I've been places where I've seen people show up and the program is such that it's almost treating them like they are little pros. And I don't know if you've come across this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is this notion that seeing youth sport as a pathway to gaining extrinsic rewards, right? In the sense of getting a scholarship or going on to the pros, and you have to start at a very young age in order to do that. So there's that notion of the professionalization that we have seen in terms of a shift, right? The move from the recreation community-based programs towards more of a business model. And so there is some change that needs to take place in terms of the youth sport. But I'm also intrigued by the other thing that you noted, in the sense that kind of this idea that anybody could coach, right? That you just pull a bunch of individuals together and that anyone would be involved in that. And so I think a positive shift is this idea that there are some knowledge and skills that are needed to be a quality coach at the youth sport level. And people, I think, are starting to recognize that in terms of particularly with, the physical and emotional safety component that's coming into play. But Pete, did you want to add to that? Because I've got another thing that I want to say, but I thought I'd give you an opportunity to kind of chime in with that professionalization piece.
Yeah, I think what we see out there, we see this professionalization part, but I also think we can't forget that there's so many kids that just really want to play, an opportunity to play. And there's so many coaches working with kids that in those situations too. And I think, I think our book helps with that. I think it guides the coach to kind of understand what setting am I working in, and why do I want to coach? And then am I in the right setting for what I want? And so I don't think there's anything wrong with some of that professionalization or some of those things. I think there's some area for that. There's a place for that. But I always think we don't want to forget that all these kids that you just want that, maybe that same experience we kind of grew up with, as I'm pretty close to the same age as you, Mark. So, that same experience for me, but I think that that's still there. And so I think helping coaches recognize where they kind of want to be, I think is really important.
Yeah, and I just to kind of piggyback on that is this notion that youth sport is a business. And what individuals are doing is they're trying to market how their business model is more beneficial than another business model. And so a lot of times I think what individuals do is that they move toward the thing that seems to be very tangible, which is, winning, which is, the number of scholarships that are offered to their athletes, the number of athletes that they have on their team that go pro. And so I think that there's a movement afoot now for individuals to begin to think about not only those tangibles, but let's take a look at, what's the retention level like for our program? Let's look at the enjoyable experience that the youth are seeing. Let's look at the level of improvement that's being made from the start of the season to the end of the season, or across seasons. And so trying to take a look at those other things that require a little bit harder work to assess, but are really impactful in terms of noting that your program is a successful program. So I think that there is that movement that's starting to take place, that there's kind of a retaliation, I think, a little bit on that professionalization piece, and sort of moving back to more of a holistic approach to athletes, and starting to be accountable and think about how you could do that better.
Yeah, I think I can speak for soccer and youth soccer. I mean, I had to take licensing courses before I could, even coach like a low level, for my
Mhm.
sons. So that's encouraging because we're now getting better soccer coaches, I guess, as a result. There's so many dimensions to coaching, right? I mean, and you've talked about it, and the book addresses so much of it. There's the retention part. You want the kids to have a fun experience. But coaches also have to help skill develop. They have to help the players get better. They have to help them learn tactics. And when you think about coaching, have you seen consistent qualities across different sports that make coaches successful in those areas?
Well, I think first of all, just a desire to teach the sport and teach the game, teach the fundamentals, because that's not a given. Just because someone's a coach, that's what they want to focus on. So I think good coaches, especially talking about youth level, definitely have to teach the skills, and I think desire to want to teach those skills and learn how to teach those skills and get better at teaching them is a big part of it. I also think that passion part is really important. A lot of us get into coaching because we're passionate about the sport, and so sharing that passion with the youth, and being demonstrating that to them, that how much you enjoy the game, is a big part of that. So I think those things really are two key points.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think that it is about having a passion for your sport, and having a passion for teaching. I would just say also, the other thing is, like, working with kids, and
Mhm.
so and understanding kids. And I think that is really important, is to think about um, that there aren't many adults. And so really focusing in on how they're different in terms of their cognitive development and physical development, I think, is also important.
So let's say I'm a parent and I'm going to start coaching my kids' team this fall. I know I'm already signed up, I've committed, I've got the responsibility. What's your advice to me?
Well, I think the first thing is work with your organization. I mean, if it's under an organization, if they may require like your soccer license, or maybe they don't, but maybe you work through them. What do they have resources for you? I know a lot of organizations have those resources. Some are required, some are not. But I also think sometimes we don't think about, or coaches getting into it don't think about, that there's a lot of national associations for coaches and groups, and there's also a lot of regional associations for coaches, and within every sport. So every sport has an organization that supports it. And if you go to any of them, whether it's National Fast Pitch Coach Association, National Association of Basketball, most of them, all of them have youth guidelines and support. What would you add to that, Lori?
Yeah, no, I think the first part is getting help, right? So if you don't have a lot of experience, drawing upon what program administrators can offer. Do they have set practice plans? Do they offer like a mini coaching session? Do they have a coach education requirement to help individuals get more um, background knowledge about coaching? And I just echo too that, if we look at national governing bodies, that they are also offering program resources as well, for coaches. And so access to those, I think, are really critical. I mean, the big piece, right, as is to just think about making it developmentally appropriate. So recognizing that how you might have been exposed to the sport, maybe as a high school athlete, or thinking about things that you might have done in college, as a parent of an 8, 9, 10-year-old, things are going to be different. What you focus in on, how you set up practices, it's very different. So really hitting on making things developmentally appropriate as well, and fun.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to be fun.
Of course. That's why we gravitate to sports in the first place, right?
That's right.
They're fun. And along those lines, I think you can find some interesting ideas on YouTube. I mean, that was sort of my fallback.
Oh yeah.
When I would search for some ideas for something to do in practice. So let's talk about, the book goes into so many different areas, but I want to help my kids get better. You have sort of a protocol in the book where you give examples of how to help kids retain better. Could you share that with us?
Oh,
Go ahead,
sure.
Lori.
Yeah. So, in terms of offering effective demonstrations, and so it's one of the key areas if we think about teaching is that we want to make sure that how we are interacting with the kids is going to help them, one, focus on us, and then also retain the information. And so we have a protocol that just emphasizes how are you helping with attention? How are you helping them be motivated? How are you helping them practice and then retaining the information? So it's just really critical to just make sure really simple things, right? Is that all eyes are on you, right? And then that you start with both presenting the demonstration both physically and then verbally, but making sure that it's really focused in on some cue points and then getting them right out to practice. But then the key piece is giving feedback to help them further retain the information.
Do I
And
remember correctly that you suggested having them repeat the verbal command?
yes, absolutely. Yeah, because what you want to do is you want to make sure that they have many opportunities to do that. And so yeah, making sure that they're repeating those cues and then getting out to practice and then have them repeat it again. And then in terms of giving feedback, really focusing in on the thing that you just taught, right? And so a lot of times what coaches will do is that they'll give this great demonstration, they'll practice it for a little bit, and then they'll move right on to the next thing and then not come back to that particular piece or integrate it into the scrimmage that they might do during practice or a short-sighted game that they might have the individuals participate in. So really giving an opportunity to really focus in on one or two things at a time when you're giving a demonstration and then emphasizing that throughout the practice in terms of giving feedback so that you can make sure that they are retaining it, getting it into that working memory and helping them remember it over time.
You good with that, Pete?
Yeah, very detailed. Thanks, Lori.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's all.
You're great, Lori. If this doesn't work out, you got a future in voiceover work because your voice is just like very professional, very smooth. It's great. It's great. Tactically, teaching tactics, is it the same thing or is it different? Like I used my opening example when I tried to teach my 7-year-olds, a very simple play. They could do it in practice, but once the game started, there was just too much excitement, between the parents on the sidelines and, chaos ensued.
Well, I mean, part of that is implementing, those type of tactical games within your practice, or having more game type like situations, even in a youth practice where they have that environment. I mean, you're not going to mimic. You can never mimic a real event, especially for youth who are going to be maybe distracted. But as far as teaching some of those, you can break those down into smaller based situational examples of whether it's scrimmage based or using a specific drill or adapting certain drills that, and then adding either a little bit of competition and there's a lot of information out there on that, on how to do that. Not necessarily in our book, we talk about it in the book, but I mean there's a lot more information you can go find. And we have some things I think just to highlight for those listening here would be that resources in the book too, or there's footnotes, et cetera, that take you to some of those other resources, because obviously the book can't be everything. So that was also one of our goals as part of the book.
Yeah, I love the book. It's so well organized, and there's a lot of helpful charts in here. I'm just going through. I want to show one. Like right there. I mean, stuff easily broken down. Well organized that you can make sense of. You start the book off with knowing your why. why I'm coaching, and why is that important?
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit, just because it's so important to know the setting you're in, but also why are you doing it? And I think, again, I mentioned, kind of we get into it. I know just from my own personal experience, I just got into coaching because an athletic administrator asked me to be a middle school coach. I wasn't even thinking about it at the time, but it was also just because I was passionate about the sport of basketball, and it was a logical kind of way to stay involved. And so I think if that happens, I think that's pretty common for a lot of people. You have people also get into it because they just really want to be involved as a coach, but knowing once you get into it, then why are you still doing it? Because after a while, that's going to change for you. And again, this is just a personal example, but I knew over time my why changed a little bit. It wasn't just I want to be involved in the game. It needed to adapt and evolve. And so I think it's a good reflection point. So I think regardless of where you're starting, or if you're already starting, and Lori, I talked about this in doing the book, if you're already a high school coach, you pick up this book, thinking again, why am I still doing this is really important, to make sure you're, again, in that right setting. Lori, what do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you really covered it there. I think the only thing that I would add to this is that the notion that understanding your why is what drives what you do on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's the other piece that we try to emphasize in the book, is that um, it's one thing to say I'm passionate about swimming, and so I want to give back in terms of swimming and give the experiences that I had to future athletes, right? But it's another thing to really think about, what am I doing in that situation? Why is this why what it is, right? And so that planning part that comes into is that understand, what is my why, holistic development of the athlete, but then also thinking about, how am I going to do that, right? So the how behind that why that will drive what I do on a regular basis. And so for us, I think our focus is to really try to help coaches be more intentional about what they do. Um, and I think it starts with their why.
I think you presented a good example in the book, again, if my memory's correct, where your goal as a coach may not line up with that particular coaching opportunity. And, for example, I think in the book, if you're more interested in winning, well, your goal may not line up with a youth swimming or soccer program, where the goal is more about fun, retention, and player development. So in the example in the book, I think it was a young lady who actually recognized that it did not take the job, which I'm not sure everybody would have that self-awareness.
No, and I think that's where we're coming from in terms of thinking about this intentionality is that you want to find a setting that works for you, but then you also want to make sure that when you're in that setting that you align what you do and that you get everybody on board with that. And one of the big areas in coach development and coach education right now in terms of trying to help prepare coaches is to think about transformational leadership. And this notion of creating a vision for your program and being able to communicate that vision. And so it's really important to know your why, and kind of coming back to that example is to share that so that all the staff are on the same page as to what the why is and what we're trying to accomplish.
You mentioned emotional intelligence as a quality of coaches, and that sort of, I think, relates somewhat to your why. Tell me what emotional intelligence for coaches means.
Yeah, so when we're looking at emotional intelligence, it's very similar to social emotional learning. And so some people may be familiar with that in terms of the term, but the reality is that emotional intelligence is thinking about how well you know yourself from an emotional standpoint. So it's about self-awareness. And so knowing what emotions that you're experiencing, knowing what triggers those emotions in a particular situation, being able to control those emotions, so that when you're in the midst, and one of the examples we use in the book, right, is that a coach in the midst of a competitive game doesn't handle it very well because can't control those emotions, and so provides a negative experience for the athletes in the moment. So being aware, being able to control, and then the other side of emotional intelligence is really about being able to connect with other people. And part of that is fostering your own empathy, so understanding what other people are feeling, and then being able to have good interpersonal skills, so working on your own social skills. And so it is about connection as well as awareness that comes into play.
Sure, sure. Um, I just had something pop up on my Zoom. That was strange. You move into the 4 C's of athletic development. Tell me about the 4 C's.
Yeah, so one of the things that we look at in terms of coaching effectiveness, what makes a coach effective? And we recognize that they have to have some professional knowledge, they have to have some interpersonal knowledge, and some intrapersonal knowledge, and that deals with reflection. Um, but when we look at how then that applies to the athlete outcomes, it really focuses in on the 4 C's. And so thinking about how can we help athletes become more competent? So how can we help them with their skill development, whether that's physical, um, uh, tactical, technical, uh, life skills, psychological skills, or social skills. And then confidence is that we're helping them build their confidence in their ability to engage in those activities and their confidence to use them in variety of situations, most likely sport, right? So they can use them effectively in a sport situation. And then connection. So, how can we help individuals connect with one another and have a sense of belonging, but also learn to interact with one another? And then character. So, how can we help individuals develop good character? And so, those become kind of those 4 C's: competence, confidence, connection, and character.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You put an example in the book of a young coach who I think is beginning their coaching journey. They're an assistant and they overhear, because they're young enough, I think, to be around the players, is what I imagine. And they overhear something about a possible future hazing incident. And then they're put in the predicament between the players, who they're probably almost like peer-like with them, they're young enough, and then knowing what's right. And do I report this to the coach? Because then you run the risk of losing your popularity, right? So that takes a really strong person. I think that's a real life dilemma that somebody could easily come across. And it may not exactly be hazing, but they may overhear something and face that challenge. Is that something that comes with maturity? Is that just what you talked about with character? Or how do you address that example?
Well, I think it's kind of to me, it's a little bit under discussed. I think a little bit in coach development is that I think a lot of times coaches are, again, you're young, you start out, you're put in a situation where, your human nature is you probably want to be liked. I mean, I think that's sort of human. We want to be liked, right? So to be mature enough to focus on what your job and your role is in leading young athletes, I think what you hinted at is there's maturity level there. And I'm someone who started out as a very young coach, and I remember being purposeful to try to distance myself because I was so worried about that. Because it's much easier to connect with those athletes when you're so close to them in a way that may not be positive either, and put you in a situation like that. I think it's a lot of it does come back to the maturity of the coach, but I think we can help coaches recognize their role maybe a little bit better, and the power you have as a coach, and understand that you have to keep that a little bit of a fulfill your role and keep a little bit of a distance, and you're in charge of leading those athletes, not being their friend, building an environment where you can have that relationship, but keeping that distance too, and staying focused on teaching them the game and helping them improve their skills.
In terms of coaching and how we instruct players, you guys, I think, break it down into 6 different styles. Was there one you found most effective, or do different styles apply in different situations?
Go ahead, Lori.
Oh, okay. So these styles range from command type styles, and so just telling athletes what to do, to more practice based, where you give them a little bit of an activity to do, and then you're giving them feedback to help them try to improve, to more learner centered, where you're giving them an opportunity to create the environment, the things that they want to be working on. So a lot more autonomy that they're given in terms of working. with the athlete. And yeah, I think you're right, is that it is based, well, let me preface this to say that all of those styles are useful to use, and coaches to varying degrees will use those styles depending on what it is that they're trying to teach, who the individual is that they're working with, and the sport that they're involved in. And so it varies, and it's going to also vary from activity to activity. So there might be some activities where it's just going to be command. You're just going to tell them what they need to do right off the bat, and then they're going to start to do that. Whereas at other times, it is an opportunity for them to discover what they're doing. So you're placing them into a game-like situation where you have created some parameters that will result in a particular situation bubbling to the top, and then they're going to deal with that. And so they're kind of discovering what they would do, and it can help with their decision-making capability in that situation to do that. And so there might be a particular intention that you might have for utilizing that. So it really just depends on, what you're trying to teach, the purpose of that lesson, who you're teaching it to, and the sport that you're involved in. Pete, would you add additional pieces to that?
I don't know that I add much more to that. I think you kind of hinted at the importance of the athlete-centered mindset, even in all the styles. I think that's really kind of is what you're hopefully trying to do. You're still keeping them in mind in the end. But I think that's the ones that you see a lot talked about right now, as far as what the movement is towards. If we were going to talk about styles, we would probably, gear people towards those more athlete-centered styles.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, right, if you have an 8 or a 9-year-old child, you're not going to say to them,
Right.
necessarily, okay, let's talk about what your practice is going to entail, right? Versus if you're working with more of a higher level athlete, maybe at a high school level, and they have been involved in training for quite some time, turning some autonomy over to them and having them contemplate and start to think about their involvement in the program, yeah, probably going to use a little bit more of that.
Right. So I won't keep you much longer. I'm curious, have you guys watched Cobra Kai on Netflix?
I have not. People tell me that I should, and I
Okay.
haven't.
It's actually a sort of a great coaching show. There's a lot going on there, but maybe even if you saw the original Karate Kid,
Yeah.
you can compare the two coaching methods between Cobra Kai and Mr. Miyagi. So I thought that would be fun to ask you whether you approve of Johnny Lawrence's coaching styles, which it's actually great comedy. But I think honestly, like there's a little bit of Johnny Lawrence in all of us. It's a little bit of our spirit animal, when you see how he does it. Who are
Yeah,
your
well,
Go
I
ahead.
was just going to say though, but as you, having watched the original Karate Kid, the thing about this is to also just note that there are times when a command style is just needed in a particular situation and is okay to implement, but recognizing when it's appropriate. And this comes back a little bit to emotional intelligence, right? Is that if it's reactionary to an emotion that you're experiencing and you're not handling it well and you come out command style, that might be problematic versus if the situation really calls for it to be handled in that particular way.
Yeah, the show's fantastic. I think you'd enjoy it, especially given, the coaching part of it. Do either of you have favorite coaches, out there on the sports landscape? Could be somebody famous, could be somebody that I never heard of, and why?
I think that for me, my favorite coaches have become the coaches you don't know. I think there's so many coaches out there doing such a great job at middle school, high school, small college. And so I'm driven towards, or I guess, follow coaches that I know are passionate, found their why, found their setting. I know that's sort of me evolving over time into where I'm at now. When I look at coaches, I really admire the coaches that really have discovered themselves and have either stayed somewhere or maybe they move at the right time or whatever it is. I think that those are something that we can learn from those individuals, and we can gain from that to help coaches down the road. So,
Lori?
Yeah, I mean, Pete and I were talking about who we're dedicating this book to. We're dedicating it to all those youth sport coaches who want to make a difference in athletes' lives. And so any coach who is going out to provide an enjoyable experience that's going to help kids want to stay involved in sport, those are my favorite coaches. Those are the ones that are doing it for the right reason, and they're really trying to help push coaching forward in a positive direction. And so, yes, I think that there are individual coaches that either I've had or I've observed that I think are just great for different reasons, that they are just doing good work out there. And so I don't have one favorite.
That's okay.
I'd
That's
add real
okay.
quick, Mark, if it's okay, I'd add, I think you can, for those looking for coaches to, emulate, or I think you can find them, regionally and close to you. I think besides looking at the media or I think you can find those coaches. And a lot of times they're retired coaches that are just looking for, to be kind of a mentor. There's a lot of those as well. So if you're looking for, help that way, I think it's probably closer to you than you think sometimes.
I think that's a great point. I know people like that.
Yeah. And I was just going to say the other piece too is to, if you're wanting to improve your coaching craft, right, is going out and observing other coaches, to learn from them, because we're all in this together in terms of trying to improve the coaching craft. And so, go out, observe someone else, have them observe you, share information back and forth, to try to improve your coaching.
Right. I told you I wouldn't keep you guys that long. Last thing is, where can people find you online, whether, you personally or any resources that you recommend, and the book?
Go ahead, Lori.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say, I teach at James Madison University. I'm in their coaching education program, and so that you can look me up there. Also on Twitter, trying to work on that social profile at Gano Overway, so available there. And in terms of resources, obviously, you can pick up the book. There are lots of good resources within the book to be able to help in terms of overall coaching.
Yeah, and I'm at Lewis and Clark State College in Idaho, not the one in Portland, often confused here. So we're State College here in Idaho, and I'm also on Twitter as well as LinkedIn, so you can find me there as well.
What's your handle, Pete?
It's at Van Mullem Pete _Pete. Yeah.
Okay. All right, great. Well, I'm writing this down. So thank you both for joining me here. I've really enjoyed talking to you. I told you I thoroughly enjoyed the book. I highly recommend it to people. And I want to wish you guys both the best in all your pursuits regarding coaching. So thanks for helping people out.
Yeah, no, thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
All right, I appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one.